I started a business 2.5, almost 3 years ago, and I've made a hell of a lot of mistakes. And I want to speak to some of those and basically help people avoid those mistakes. These mistakes have cost me a lot of money, a lot of time. I've seen other people scale businesses way faster just because they didn't make these mistakes. Now, I made these mistakes because I started very young. I started this business at 17, and I had, tried to do other things before, but, doing the wrong things had me going around in circles. And so I want to speak a little bit on those. First and biggest thing was I did not start by focusing on a problem that people had. I started by focusing on basically, I had the skill, which was development, and I wanted to just throw it out there and solve problems with it. I started a development agency, but my focus was way too broad. My development agency was open to doing pretty much anything, given that we obviously knew the technology that we were working with. Going that broad was a bad idea. Actually, I originally started by focusing on the blockchain space because that was a space that was going very, very well, but then the markets, had a downturn, and that market was a very volatile one. And so when that market went down, I thought, okay, this is not a market that I want to be in, which I think is still true because I didn't have any special expertise in it. It was just, it had gone up at the time. But then I went way too general. I'll speak more on this in the second mistake. I didn't manage to get niche enough for a long time. I didn't know exactly what direction I wanted to go in. I didn't know exactly kind of which specific problem I wanted to focus on. I had a skill that I knew could solve some problems, but I wasn't sure about which problem I was solving. And that, I think, was a major, major issue. I've seen people scale way faster just because they knew exactly which problem that they were solving for businesses. And the second big mistake that I made was not spending enough time on marketing and enough time working on the business. And I'll say this right now, I think especially for developers, it's a lot easier to work in the business than on it. What I mean by that is it is a hell of a lot easier for us as developers to code something, to code a deliverable, because you write the code and it produces an outcome. And this is a process that we are deeply, deeply familiar with. I have been coding since I was 12, 13. And so I'm already good at this thing. And then working on the business is a completely different skill set that has nothing to do with programming. Half the time, you have no idea what you're doing. You got to do marketing, which is not something you're familiar with. You got to work on the business and figure out like what problems you want to solve, whatever. And it's very uncertain. And so because of that, I think it's generally work that's very easy to avoid, especially because client deadlines are always very tangible. You can always feel them, right? This client deadline's coming up. I got to serve this guy. I need to show up for him on this day. Whereas working on the business is never a fixed deadline because it's just for you, right? And so there's never somebody else who's pressing you for it. And so it's very, very easy, especially if you're a bootstrap business like I am. I took on no funding, which means I need to constantly get more cash flow in order to feed myself and the business and whatever. I took advantage of the fact that as a kid, like I have very little to lose. And so I could risk a lot, but over time I started hiring employees and things, and I have a small team now. And so I have to make sure that I keep money on the table. And so it's very easy for me to get distracted with servicing existing deals, making sure those are good, and then not working anything on the marketing. You need to make your service really, really good because you need to keep your clients and you need to have relationships with them. That is paramount, and it's one of the things that I did do right. But one of the things I did wrong is I didn't force myself to set aside time to do marketing and to work on the business and to work on niching down and whatever. There were times when, maybe a client wanted me specifically to work on a deal, and so I would spend time coding and all of that, and I wouldn't set aside time to work on marketing or to work on niching and to work on getting to a more specific problem. What happened was I would spend a large amount of time, I went months and months where I didn't really work on narrowing down what problem I was solving because I was too busy thinking about client fulfillment. I think this is one of the biggest challenges as a bootstrap business as a whole. Like that's what makes it hard, is because you have a million things to juggle. You just have to do a little bit of every one. If you just do marketing and you don't do a good job, you're going to have a really hard time expanding because your clients will all leave you and you're going to get terrible referrals, terrible word of mouth. But at the same time, if you do the opposite and you don't spend enough on marketing, you're just going to be way too broad. That's a position that I kind of find myself now, like I'm solving that nowadays, but it's definitely something that cost me a lot of time. I could have scaled way faster if I had gotten more specific. And it's not to say it can't scale while you've got a pretty broad offering. Like I've managed to make it into 6 figures and 5 figures a month, whatever, but it's in the grand scheme of things, not that much. And I have a long way to go and a lot more lessons to learn, but I have to sit down and solve these problems that fundamentally I left unresolved for a very long time because I had so much distraction, and I never forced myself to do that thing because it was never the utmost priority because there was never a deadline and things like that. Those were the two biggest mistakes that I really made and that cost me so much time and money essentially I could have otherwise had. If I had gotten more niche faster and if I had just spent more time on marketing, I would be way further ahead. Not doing those two things cost me a lot of time and money. And so, if I can help somebody else avoid that mistake, I'd absolutely love to. It's really, really paramount that you figure out what you want to focus on. And when I say what you want to focus on, you got to focus on an ICP, so an ideal client profile. You got to fix their problems. Far too many people start way too broad, but just look at what you have at your surroundings and try and solve those problems first. And that led me to kind of niching into startups and stuff, but that can be obviously challenging because startups sometimes have funding issues, but fundamentally that wasn't a specific enough problem. There was not one single problem that I was helping people solve, and so it was very hard hard to market that, and I think that's a huge thing. Anyway, I hope that lesson is useful to somebody. I really, really hope somebody takes it and uses that and skips all the wasted time that I had. But yeah, comment if you have any questions. I record every day, so I'll try and take a look at those and make any videos out of interesting comments. But otherwise, that's pretty much it for this video.